Hey friends, thanks for joining me, Jim Baroud, to hear a few insights from leaders who represent our innovation ecosystem. Today's chat is with Jeffrey Vega, President and CEO of the Princeton Area Community Foundation, and Maria Vizcarrondo, President and CEO of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers.
Maria, talk to us about what you do.
So I'm Maria Vizcarrondo. I'm the president CEO of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, which is a philanthropic service organization. And our role is to support, educate, and promote philanthropy in New Jersey. And we do that by supporting our members and providing services as they need them, whether it's education, support in different ways, and convening. We play a major role in convening our members around particular issues and topics.
Great, thank you. And Jeff, go ahead.
Well, let me begin by saying thank you for hosting us. My name is Jeffrey Vega. I am the president and CEO of the Princeton Area Community Foundation, and our mission is to promote philanthropy, particularly in the greater Mercer County area. We serve as advisors to philanthropists and donors who want to be connected to meaningful causes and nonprofits. We also are a grant maker. We award grants to regional nonprofits doing important work in areas of basic human needs, the arts, and the environment.
Great. This is great. I'm glad we have both of you on. One helps the other, right, Maria? Explain that for a sec.
Absolutely. So our role is to support our members, which are the foundations in New Jersey, large corporate family foundations, in whatever they need to be able to make good strategic philanthropy possible. So we do a variety of programs, and I should say that just about every state in the country, I believe, has what's called a philanthropic service organization to support foundations in their particular area. So for instance, one of the key roles we play is convening our members around major issues. And even if it's not major issues, we convene them around topic areas. Some of our members are interested in place-based philanthropy, which means that they may be interested in just Newark. So we have a grouping there of foundations that support programs in Newark. We have some that are the corporations, which while they give money, have a very different business model about how they surface that. And very importantly, I think we bring to the table a lot of great programming and experts on variety of areas to help philanthropy move forward. And I think one of the key things we do is create opportunities for thought leadership. So we create a space for what we call learning communities, so that people can actually work in that capacity, learn more about a topic. Perfect example, we were involved with the creation of a playbook when Superstorm Sandy occurred, that created a playbook that philanthropy has been able to use to look at ways to provide grants in areas of disaster. So that's just a short answer to what could be a very long question, because there's so much we do, but that's primarily our role.
So give us
for instance, I did want to say that Jeff and the Princeton Area Foundation is a member of the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. And in fact, he's our current chair of the board. So
wonderful. Well, that's obviously smart leadership. But Maria, give us a sense for those folks who aren't familiar with the nonprofit sector. How many foundations are there in the state and or in the country? I mean, what are the numbers here? Do you have any sense? Can you give us a sense for how many organizations there are?
Well, there's a number of things. First of all, nationally, there's thousands of them, so it's hard to just give you a number. In New Jersey, our membership is 130 members, and probably representing the most prominent organizations and most active foundations in the area. Now, what I will tell you, we constantly are looking at supporting and engaging new money. So there's a lot of new folks that are starting to do philanthropy and really need some guidance as to how to best make that happen. To some degree, some of the work that Jeff is doing in his shop, we may do with other philanthropic people throughout the state. So we make that happen, but we represent, as I said, corporations, independent foundations, and place-based and family foundations overall. So we probably manage the larger number of members, and I'm happy to say that the membership is pretty consistent. I guess we are a value add to the membership. So that'll kind of give you a picture. Then on top of that, you also have regional. There's state PSOs, and there's regional ones that are very focused on a topic like immigration or the other communities in particular. But they are also members of what we call the United Philanthropic Forum, which brings all of us together on a national level. So we're all we're part of that network, and that includes state, regional, and national PSOs.
That's very helpful. Thank you. And Jeff, go ahead. Talk to us about, your perspective on that question, but also tell us in layman's terms about the foundation and how you operate for those of us unfamiliar with you.
Absolutely. I will add a little bit to what Maria said. Prior to the pandemic, Giving New Jersey ranked New Jersey as the 18th most charitable state in the union. So we're pretty high. After the pandemic, the foundations and corporations that have philanthropic programs rose to the occasion. So I imagine we're ranked much higher. Everybody really came together to meet the crisis and give more resources to nonprofits that were meeting needs. In terms of the Princeton Area Community Foundation, we are a community foundation. We're one of over 860 in the country. New Jersey has a handful of them. We're very proud that by Charity Navigator has listed PACF as one of the top 10 community foundations in the country. And what we do is we promote philanthropy. We work with a lot of charitable individuals that come to us to set up funds, like what you might have heard, something called a donor advised fund, like that works like a giving account where they direct giving to their favorite causes. We also have assets that we use for competitive grant making. We focus a lot of our giving around basic human needs. So addressing issues like food insecurity, mental health, rental assistance, all those issues that have become even more important during this crisis. We also host very important grant making programs. We host the New Jersey Arts and Culture Recovery Fund. That's a group of foundations that have come together to really support the arts sector in New Jersey. We also host others, giving circles like the Fund for Women and Girls that support causes that help economically disadvantaged women and girls. So we do a lot of philanthropic work in the region, and a lot of our donors support causes all across the country. So we give to a lot of 501c3s all across the United States.
Great. Well, that's really good to hear that you're in the top 10. That's I didn't know that. So I'm glad to have you on board.
Right here in New Jersey.
Right. So what about the state of philanthropy, Maria? I mean, in the state, in the region, and as you see it across the country, how are things looking?
So it's an interesting time to be in philanthropy. We are proudly in the middle of what I call a revolution of thought and leadership change. And I say that because this pandemic has in many ways made us stop and look at issues that we've known have been there, but know that we have to reimagine how we do business. So there's two things I think driving a lot of our work most recently, and I think Jeff will agree with me. The issue of equity has really come to the forefront, so that we are working with all our foundations are looking at how do they soul search within their own organizations and figure out how they can really elevate equity in all of their work. I think that's a critical piece that everyone is engaged in, and we're trying to provide, we the council is trying to provide a lot of thought leadership around that for our members. Number two is the whole issue of driving or eliminating the power dynamic between the nonprofit and the foundations, which historically has not allowed for oftentimes a true partnership. This pandemic, I think, has forced many of our members to be more trusting, to be more nimble in how they distribute dollars. And I think the trust factor is real important. They're trusting that the stakeholders, I don't want to call them grannies anymore, stakeholders are doing the right thing, and they're trusting them with the dollars that they distribute. So we're hoping that long-term, that those changes, especially as it relates to the power dynamic, will continue to be there. And that equity in looking at how our boards are staffed, how we hire in organizations to advance leadership of people of color within the philanthropic world is very critical. So we're trying to support those efforts and help our organizations move along in that rank. Right now, Jeff is the only president and CEO of a foundation in New Jersey. We need to make sure that we replicate Jeff.
Who is Latino.
Who is Latino on top of that. We have to replicate more of that. But even when it comes to the Black community, you only have 2 African-American leaders of foundations. So there's a lot of work to do, 130 organizations, and also those boards, because that also is going to influence how they give money, right? And how they hire. So those are important mindsets that we have to help our members to incur.
Great, that was really, really helpful and illuminating, actually. Jeff, what's your perspective on the state of the state for philanthropy?
I think in terms of before and after the pandemic hit. So before the pandemic hit, a lot of foundations and philanthropic institutions in New Jersey were carving out important areas to address, whether it's education, the arts, the environment, all very important. The pandemic hit and COVID was on nobody's radar screen for charitable giving. We had to act quickly, really think about how do we do collaboration much differently than we ever have before. How do we inspire partnership with nonprofits in a way that, as Maria said, really engendered more trust. Your viewers can Google trust-based philanthropy. It's a new movement in philanthropy that says everybody gets to sit at the table with equal power. And we bring one resource. Nonprofits that are, for example, serving the community bring their wealth of experience and how to reach people and meet their needs. And together we can make a difference. So it's a different paradigm shift that has happened in philanthropy, one that I think is very much welcome, and one that has highlighted the issues that Maria's talked about as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And particularly for foundation is looking at how do we become even more inclusive in our decision-making process.
And is that consistent, Jeff, across the country? Obviously, you know what your peers are doing, and you're one of the top, foundations in the country. How does it look across the country?
I believe so. I believe it's happening all across the country. It's happening with a lot of philanthropic service organizations across the country, and deepening the work of foundations that were already in this lane in doing this work. And I cite our work. We have been working with an initiative called All Kids Thrive, creating nonprofits between schools and nonprofits to deal, to understand how do we remove the barriers to chronic absenteeism, for example. There's also the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and their priority on health equity. So a lot of that had been going on prior. Now that work is even deepening even more.
If I could just piggyback on that a minute, one of the initiatives we've rolled out at the council is called, we call it Doing Good Better. And that's the shortcut for deepening and increasing philanthropic engagement. But we call it Doing Good Better because it's the easier way to put it. But it's an opportunity to bring foundations and nonprofit leaders together to start talking about how should we reimagine our work in the future, not only from a philanthropic perspective, but also how do you build a leadership, and how should we engage the nonprofits? What kind of relationship should we have going forward to have a greater impact? So that's just rolling out now, and you'll hear more about it as time goes on. And actually we've invited him to be a member of that.
Wonderful. Well, and you mentioned the pandemic earlier, both of you. Give us some examples of how nonprofits or foundations in your sphere have responded and weathered this tragic
Let me just mention very quickly, and then I'll throw it to Jeff. What we did at the council is we convened all of the foundations that had set up funds for distribution. And in that convening, we brought to their attention experts in disaster funding. We also looked at creating a map that would look to see if there was gaps in any communities overall, so that our different members could look to see how they could fill those gaps. We spent a lot of time with our members really trying to understand, help them understand, and bringing together other entities like the state pandemic fund ended up working with us as well, and bringing as many partners as possible to see how we could collaborate and work together to have more impact in the communities. Jeff, take it away.
No, I can give you two quick examples of how we worked together during this pandemic. One was there were 5 foundations that came together inspired by the work that the Burke Foundation had been doing around children who experienced trauma. And they've been doing this work for quite some time. But again, during this pandemic, especially in a time when kids were going back to school after being a year isolated and by remote learning or hybrid learning, there was a need to really begin to train teachers and lunch staff and bus drivers and others who are going to be around students, how to identify if they are exhibiting trauma, and then how to help school districts develop the action plan. So with the Burke Foundation's leadership, they brought together the Dodge Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, us, and the New Jersey Pandemic Fund. And together, we put into a pool fund of about $1 million to support a nonprofit organization called the Foundation for Education Administration, FEA, that specializes in providing that kind of training, a model called Healing Centered Engagement. And that went, and there were 25 schools that participated in that pilot, and it was very successful. We've replicated that model in Mercer County, and we're on our way to provide 25 schools within the county the same kind of training. Again, with the end result that school districts will have action plans to be able to refer kids to mental health services and supports that they need. The second example that I love is, the Council of New Jersey Grantmaker had an existing affinity group of foundations that funded arts. This group, under COVID, realized that a lot of arts organizations were suffering, and especially those that employed individual artists, and they were not getting some of the individual support that was coming down from government. So what happened is that they came together, they formed a fund called the New Jersey Arts and Culture Recovery Fund to support arts, culture, and history organizations throughout New Jersey with grants, particularly organizations that are small and effective throughout New Jersey. And they've raised millions and millions of dollars, about $4 or $5 million. The effort still is continuing. Just hired an executive director to take it to the next level, raise money, and help the arts sector in New Jersey. So those are two examples at how foundations and corporations came together to help during this time.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. Now, is it the best case scenario where you provide grant money to a nonprofit? It's very successful, and then it's replicated across the country. Is that a great success story for you, Jeff, and Maria as well?
I think the success story are the lessons that we've learned during this pandemic. Number one, keep funding flexible. Number two, relieve nonprofits of the administrative burden, free them from the reporting requirements that a lot of foundations impose. So let them do what they do best and get out of the way by providing the resources while being great partners and learning what happens and then adapting. So those were some of the highlights and lessons from this.
Great. Maria, did you have anything to add?
No, in agreement. I think those are lessons learned not only in New Jersey, but when I meet with my colleagues from around the country, it's really been interesting how this has been almost uniformly impacting people. And so you see a lot of really great innovation that's coming out of all over the country as well on how to deal with the pandemic and how to go beyond the pandemic. So you're going to see a lot. We're seeing now already that a lot of the PSOs are collaborating around programs that initiatives that are helping to kind of move the needle on this work.
I see. Speaking of the pandemic, I know we had the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, and I know I did an event early on and raised some money for them. Dispassionately, how good a job did they do in comparison to others across the country?
I think they did a terrific job. Again, it was a time that was initially chaotic. It was emergency based. And so being able to unify to raise dollars and then award it out in a very nimble way. We, in our own local region here in the Mercer County, we also established a similar fund. And under the leadership of the council, Maria brought us all together so we can communicate and share how to be nimble and how to get those resources out quickly without much strain. So the New Jersey Pandemic Fund did a great job, as did many of the COVID relief funds across the state.
I wanted to add something because it's the lessons learned from other disasters that helped in this situation. In previous disasters, government would raise money, the governor's office usually would raise money and kind of do their own thing, not connecting with everyone else. And if I recall, when Superstorm Sandy occurred, there was funds left over. And what did the governor's office have to do? Distribute it to the foundations to help them dispense it as well as they thought you needed to, because I think they realized that you have to know that business. You have to do very specific protocols and work to make it happen. So this time, what I think was great was that very early on, the leadership of that fund connected with us, and we started to include them in a variety of ways. And they also did a variety of work with our different members, depending on in the state what they wanted to do. And I think one of the big takeaways from there, not a takeaway, but I think one of the great things that happened there that couldn't happen before was they figured out, they problem solved how to create cash opportunities where they could give money out to undocumented individuals that could not benefit from all of the services being provided. They did a lot of great things, but I think that was one of the most innovative initiatives that came out of the work of the pandemic fund.
And I will just add quickly that I think the philanthropic sector was able to act quickly and be very nimble in getting resources out, government has a different accountability approach. They needed to go through certain channels before the federal and state dollars can get out into the streets to help people. So the fact that the philanthropic sector was able to act nimbly, it gave government the opportunity to catch up and get the PPP loans and get the special targeted initiatives that had to go through the legislature to get out. We were able to get out quickly to deal with the emergency. So it's all one collaboration, but philanthropic, we have the luxury of being a little bit more innovative and being more nimble.
That's really good to hear. In many ways, this community has been the unsung heroes, and that's why I'm glad you're highlighting this to responding to the pandemic. Nimble and innovative and novel, not always things we associate with, foundations or nonprofits. And it's great to hear that you guys, along with your colleagues, have been so effective in responding so quickly. So that's great. So let's speak about innovations you're seeing, not just during the pandemic, but things that you have seen across the spectrum that are worth sort of highlighting today. Any things that you've seen, again, locally, regionally, or nationally, Marie or Jeff?
Why don't let me let Jeff go first this time?
And
Age before beauty.
In terms of innovations, I want to say that the pandemic inspired, as you've already heard me say, more collaborations and meaningful collaborations with nonprofits. The real heroes in this have been the nonprofits who have received the dollars and have worked under extraordinary circumstances to get to people, to make sure people had food, to make sure people had, one of my favorite stories was an organization by the name of Arm in Arm, where the person got in their car and in front and put down their window a little bit, and the family was standing in their porch, and he was guiding the family on how to help their child use the Chromebook that the district had given to them, connect to the Wi-Fi so that the child can continue with their education while giving them a bag of food so they can stay home and shelter in place. And this was then he was off to drive off to the next neighborhood. So these were nonprofits that were heroes doing a lot of that grassroots work, and we were really privileged to be in a position to support that work. So I don't know if I call it innovation, but this is the work that nonprofits are doing, and they just were innovative in how they were going to stay safe and healthy while meeting the needs of people in the community.
I think also, just to add to that, to being innovative, I think this situation really empowered nonprofits to prove what they can do. And so therefore, it's going to be very hard to put the genie back in the bottle to the way things were before, because they've proven that they know how to handle situations and work with communities, and that foundations really need to be supporting those efforts in a more democratic, equitable way.
And then I'm sorry, Maria, I thought you were done. The second thing I will add is that the other innovation is that more and more donors looking for expertise with guidance on how to guide their dollars to make a meaningful impact. In that role, the community foundations that are in New Jersey, we had to step up even in more ways to how to help donors and guide their dollars to places where they're really needed.
Right. And so, what about the outlook now for the sector, right? In the short and long term, Maria, are there any policy challenges? You hear in the news sometimes about deductions and things like that. What are some of the things that are important for us to consider and for policymakers to consider going forward?
I think, well, first of all, you're going to see foundations being much more aggressively involved in trying to influence policy, where before that was not something they got involved with. But recognizing how the whole process works now, I think you're going to see them much more involved and taking positions on situations, not lobbying per se, but really advocating for the sector as a sector leader. I think that's a big one. The other one is that if we are able to really move this initiative like Do Good Better that we're doing in the state, which is being replicated in other states throughout the country, it's that we're going to see a different dynamic of how the foundation and the nonprofit work together. And hopefully you're going to see more members of more diversity in the membership of boards of foundations, but also more diversity in the decision-making of how dollars are spent in foundations. And I've had a taste of that. The United Way model was kind of like that. And I always thought it was such a positive model in the sense that it brought everybody to the table for those opportunities. So I think those are big ones for us. And the other thing is we're now learning, we have to see how everybody's going to land now, because how are we going to be able to touch people in this virtual world? And that means learning we're going to have new nuances of how to deal with each other if this continues. Because in the helping profession, a big piece of it is touching people, right? So it'll be interesting to see what comes up in that area.
Mm-hmm. I see. And Jeff?
What I'll add to that is that for us, we've always been in the fight of trying to deal with inequities in our community, and the pandemic has shown us that we need to step up our game. And so some of the things that we saw images on TV of children trying to look for Wi-Fi spots to do their work, that's just not acceptable. So it's going to call for much more meaningful partnerships with schools and governments and other giving institutions to be able to come together to find really solutions to some of the most intractable problems that exist in our community. So we just have to do better.
Right. And what about the longer term? We have a more diverse, a younger group of philanthropic folks coming up into the ranks, and this stock market has certainly helped. Maybe the crypto markets have helped for some, for others not so much. How you peek ahead, look into your crystal ball, and maybe your colleagues are being thought leaders on this across the country. What does the future foretell here about giving?
Well,
go ahead, Maria. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, because you.
No, we're probably going to say the same thing, but I think that in terms of the long term is really having a better understanding of the diversity of philanthropy. Philanthropy now happens in much different ways than it has had in the past. Younger generations have different ways of how they want to give than the older generations, and so we have to understand how different ethnic groups operate in terms of charitable giving, and so that we can create more room at the table and work better in partnerships. So I think the longer term is just greater understanding of how we do philanthropy and do it better.
Mm-hmm. And I would just add, hopefully you're going to see much more diversity in the philanthropic field among staff, board members, leadership of philanthropy. But so that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to point out, just as an example that leads to that, is I've had conversations lately with some of our members that are part of family foundations, and they're going through an explosive change as well. Many of the founders of those family foundations are now retiring out, and the next generations are taking over. And they're looking at philanthropy very differently than their fathers or mothers or their parents did. So that's one thing. And another growing group in that is women leading family foundations and how they look at the world. So those are going to influence, especially in that sector, just looking at that sector, and that's a smaller one, the family foundation and what direction they're going to be taking in the future.
Wow, that's fast. It's going to be fast.
Exciting times.
Fascinating to watch. And I think, it really portends a more engaged future, right? If we have younger people thinking about balance, impact, philanthropy, sustainability, right? There's so much more, seemingly so much more engaged.
Mhm.
That would translate into more engaged approaches, right? So that's going to change everything, right? It seems not only for current foundations, but new foundations that are going, or nonprofits that are going to start. Is that what
Mhm.
we're going to see?
I think so.
I believe so.
The train has left the station and it's going full force.
Got it. All right. Before we get to some questions that have been submitted, I want to ask you, share with us just one thing that everyone should consider when they're going to think about contributing to a nonprofit.
I'll say it in 2 words: unrestricted support. Let's give the nonprofits flexibility to put the dollars where it's needed and empower them in making the decision.
And just to piggyback on that, because that's what I would have said too, is trust those organizations that you contribute to, that they're going to do the right thing.
Great. And what about that trust factor? Is there the charitable navigator or places where they can see how well those nonprofits are functioning?
Yes, those are traditional sources that rate organizations based on financial transparency. And again, there are community foundations in New Jersey that, like us at the Princeton Area Community Foundation, that help to advise donors on organizations that are doing great work. But yes, Charity Navigator is certainly a source for due diligence.
But they're also going to be going through tremendous transformation. And some of those organizations are now merging with others. And part of it is that, especially if we're talking about, I remember that one of the things that used to bug me about Charity Navigator and some of GuideStar was that they were looking at what you spent on administrative costs, and it had to be under 5%, or they not discourage outwardly, but really the test of having a gold star was having a small administrative cost. And that's some of the things that we're trying to eliminate or see go on the wayside, because we're realizing now that if an agency can't keep the lights on, they can't serve people. So we have to use different metrics to determine what makes a great organization. And that's the outcomes and services they're providing. So I think all of those programs are going to have to change the way they measure a great organization or a good organization.
Got it. Well, that's informative. What kind of technology do foundations use to help them in their work? What are their pain points in running foundations, and how can technology help? So those are a few questions in one, but they all relate to technology. So talk to us about that.
Boy, we in the last couple of years, we've upped our game in using technology at the Community Foundation to do a variety of things. Number one, we went from 10 years ago doing a paper-based application process to now using technology to everything happens through online application submission and review. And so we've gotten light years to do better with technology. Also, how we've always used technology to store our donor information and finance. And so we use technology in different ways to do due diligence also on how we award grants.
So in our case, since we're not giving direct grants, the way technology has impacted us is we wouldn't have been able to survive this pandemic without technology. The webinars, having Zoom meetings to bring our folks together to convene and work on issues. We just finished one of our conferences recently. We couldn't do that without Zoom and Whova. I never even knew those terms before. Now I know what Whova is and Zoom. We need all of those technologies to ensure that we are best serving our members in every way possible. And quite frankly, we had one of the things that I found exciting was that our Zoom meetings, when we had board meetings, 100% participation with Zoom. So I don't know if we ever want to let go of that for board meetings, but we found ourselves being more effective and more efficient in reaching more people with the technology. So even if we go back to, in fact, we have now become a totally virtual office. And we'll look at it over the next couple of years, because I'm an extrovert, I like to be out there. But right now, we did an amazing job operating as a virtual office. So we're trying that out, and I think you're gonna find a number of organizations staying in that ilk because it's efficient, it saves money in some ways. So that's the way we've been able to use it.
Great. That's really good to hear. Everything has changed, right? Because of Zoom technology, right? And the you know, from my perspective, I sit on boards, and obviously you manage boards, and just getting engagement via Zoom is so much more efficient, frankly. So that's a good thing. Okay, next question. If there's any other questions, please submit them. He's saying, I think a majority of the nonprofit work around New Jersey's people focus on important issues around COVID and work experience, culture, equity, among other initiatives. He was wondering if you folks had any insights on the increase in nonprofit media, and how do you view this area in the context of your overall work with your members?
For us, media and communications is very important because, again, before the pandemic, we had to think about how do we get our message out to donors, get our message out to nonprofits. You know, during the pandemic, our visibility skyrocketed because of getting the news out there of how we were helping different groups do what they do best. So it's a very important vehicle for many nonprofits on how to get out there in front of donors.
And we are, the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers is a nonprofit. So for us, we're looking at very much in the future, putting even more resources and investing more in technology because of the social media, because that's where you do connect. And especially when you talk about young donors and the younger generations, that's how they communicate, right? So we need to do that to be with the program of where we need to be to reach people.
I see. What about the nonprofit? What about those types of organizations in the midst of a decline in, you know, in media and press in general across the country? How do you view those, or are you funding them, or are your funders funding them?
We specifically don't have a fund for that. I know that there are a couple of foundations that focus on supporting the media. I know that the media has been declining in terms of the traditional approaches, and have shifted more into the ROI, the spotlight, the tap into, and those have been very helpful in being able to do that, especially the local coverage, where that's, in my view, that's where the news happens. So they've been very helpful.
I think one of the things that needs to happen, in addition to what Jeff said, is some innovation about what people may want to know and learn about, because that's what's going to drive support. So let me give you an example. There's a group that came to see me that are interested in funding or giving funds to stipends to local reporters to specifically report on issues of interest, whether it's, in this case, it was the environment. And, you know, one of the issues we always say is that if you look at newspapers, they're always putting the sensational things, take up all the space in a paper. Well, this group, these funders are looking at providing funding so that other areas are covered, issues of education, issues of the environment, and giving stipends specifically so those reporters will focus on that. because it's all about where the dollar is, right? On where you report. So I think there's going to be more of that in the future because people are, especially now with the issue of the environment, are going to be very concerned. So I think there's going to be more, whatever the next innovation is. You know, I grew up with the Newark Star Ledger and the Newark Evening News. When those went away, it was like, you know, and we're surviving, right? So whatever the next iteration is, I'm sure it's a matter of thinking through and looking at it and trying to see what's next, what's going to attract people.
Right. What about as people consider their donations this holiday season? Is there a directory? Is there somewhere to go search? Because these days people are becoming more specific in what they want to give to or who they want to give to. Is there any easy way to sort of do that?
You know, this may be a shameless plug, but again, community foundations, that's what we exist. We exist to help donors think very thoughtfully about their giving. You know, we have over 400 funds at the Community Foundation. Each one has about 2 to 7 advisors that we engage in their charitable giving. And, you know, donors want to make sure that every dollar they give is very impactful. So that's why community foundations exist, to really serve that need.
Okay. Maria?
Well, that's the truth. And the other thing, I'm sorry, I have to throw this other shameless plug, but the United Ways are, and their we have United Ways as members too, are another group that people should look at because they always have their ear to the ground with what's happening in that community and could keep you aware of organizations that are great to give to. So that's the other piece of it.
Got it. But is there not another site where people can say, I want to donate to something that helps the environment in New Jersey or in the region? Is there something that's sort of quickly intuitive to them that they should consider as well?
I think people, when they want to look for causes, they start Googling, right? They start going to the website of the nonprofit that they care about to look who's involved, what kind of work they're doing. You know, part of the value of what community foundations do is that we do due diligence on every contribution we make. You have to make sure that the nonprofit has an up-to-date 501c3 and that they are a registered charity, or else the donor can't take the deduction if you don't make it to a qualified charitable organization. So I think donors can do some of the basic research and then turn to an organization like a community foundation to get some, you know, specialized help.
I see.
Yeah, years ago, United Way used to provide what they call the community directory that helped with some of that information, but it's hard to keep up with it because the other thing is that you have a new nonprofit. Almost every day somebody files a 501c3 and has an organization. So if you're looking for specific areas of interest, it's probably best to Google it and find it through there. And most people actually look in their own communities first.
Got it. One last question, folks. There's a question about all the rescue plan money or all the money that's still coming down the pike here from the federal government. Are they in conversation with nonprofits as they have been in the past to try to deploy that money in quick fashion?
There's been a lot of collaboration that I'm aware of between government and nonprofits. Everything from getting the PPP loans out to many nonprofits who would have not survived without that loan, which then turned into forgiveness. There are a lot of foundations that are interacting with different departments like children services and human services to be able to engage in cross-sector partnership to address different needs. There was an effort that we played a role in trying to convene different segments of government with communities to address the issue of rental assistance, for example, getting those dollars out quicker. So yes, again, as I said before, there has to be a level of collaboration and partnership that has never been seen before in order to address a lot of these very difficult issues.
Got it.
And there's more initiatives underway. I'm on a board right now, a nonprofit board that is waiting for certain, the thing is that there's a lot of money that's going to be coming down the pike. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to interface with government to see how to best disperse that or invest it in communities. But it's still in the working stages. So that's one of the pieces. That's one of the things that's going on. I've just been appointed to serve on the governor's task force for wealth gap. We have our first meeting next week. And part of it is to look at what government's role could be in trying to address issues of full funding for employment that is, not prevailing wage or better, and what those need to be going in the future. So I've been invited to sit at that table with some government people. So there's a lot of different initiatives going on to try to address that.
Got it. Well, that's good to hear. So this has been a great discussion. Thank you for doing this, folks. We usually end with a poem or a saying. So Maria, ladies first.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'm a big fan of Maya Angelou. So I picked a short poem that she put together that I always find inspiring, and especially as a person that always looked to work in the nonprofit world. I learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
Wonderful, wonderful reminder. Jeff, go ahead.
That's one of my favorites, Maria. I have two quick ones that I'll share, two quotes that inspire me. One is, in the work that I do, is never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. And that's by Margaret Mead. And then one that resonates with me is the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And so that's Mark Twain. So that's one that quote that resonates with me.
Great.
I like that one.
That's great. Thank you so much, folks. Thanks for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. Please like it, leave a review, and subscribe. See you soon.